My wedding day is an example of how a moment you've dreamed of 1,000 times may suddenly turn into a nightmare. As I stood there, the day I believed would mark the start of a beautiful life with the lady I loved was anything but ideal. Sarah stood behind me, beaming in her gown and smiling, the altar weighing down every pledge I was about to make. It appeared flawless, but I'm now wondering whether it had been practiced. The ceremony began nicely, and my parents were beaming with delight. The atmosphere was full of the kind of happiness that only occurs at weddings, and my buddies were exchanging knowing winks. Sarah's hand trembled in mine, and I knew something wasn't right. I blamed it on nerves. Who wouldn't be nervous on their wedding day? However, the shaking wasn't due to anxiety, but rather to feelings of betrayal, guilt, and something much colder. As the priest's remarks reverberated across the auditorium, "Sarah, do you take this man much colder?" Her lips were parted, but the words that came out weren't the right ones. "And this man was your legally wed spouse." As anticipated, she took a step back, let go of my hand, and gave me a dispassionate glance. "However," she continued, "I can't do this with pity." For a brief time, I believed she was overwhelmed by the day's emotions, or if I misinterpreted her, but she then turned her back. Now that the room had frozen, my brother's voice was clear, steady and directed at the audience. "This is Andrew's moment." As Andrew approached us, I gazed at him, then at her, his self-assured grin spreading across his face. "Sarah, I'm having trouble processing what I just heard. Is this a joke of some sort?" Strange trick, but the way Sarah's eyes brightened, and Andrew stood erect. It all hit me like a sledgehammer. "Why don't you join the audience?" Her comments, "This is where you belong," were incisive and authoritative, and they completely broke my heart. I was stuck in place while the visitors processed what had just transpired, and everything around me was a whirl of whispers and gasps. People I had known for years and who had congratulated me on my engagement suddenly regarded me with a mixture of sympathy and shock. My parents were too stunned to intervene, and my friends were too appalled to talk. Beside Sarah was Andrew, my alpha brother, the golden child who was impervious to wrongdoing. His grin widened, as though he should have been there. I wanted to slap him across the face, but I refrained. Not yet, no. I had to maintain my poise since I could feel all eyes on me. Every assumption and judgment in the room would immediately be overturned, giving them the triumph they so desperately desired. "Is this some sort of joke?" Sarah tilted her head as I inquired in a calm voice, despite the storm boiling within me. "It's serious business between Michael, Andrew, and me," as evidenced by her nearly mocking attitude. Andrew said, "This wedding was a mistake, love." His voice was brimming with arrogance. "Put aside your haughtiness, little brother. You wouldn't want to spoil our special day." My blood boiled on that big day, and I tightened my fists, using every muscle in my body. Despite my body's cries for me to lash out, I made myself breathe deeply. Andrew's life had been filled with struggles as he sought acceptance and appreciation for his position within the family. His presence was larger than life, and now he was stealing the one item I believed to be mine alone. But I didn't have time to get angry because that would only make me appear weak. They were mistaken if they believed that I would break beneath the weight of their betrayal, just like the idiot they wanted me to be. I fixed my tie, straightened my back, and grinned in a serene manner. I stepped aside and said, "By all means," wiped the smirk off Andrew's face, indicating to the priest, "Enjoy the stage." The room burst into commotion, with some standing in awe and others hurrying to me as they muttered angrily with worried mutterings, but I ignored them and moved calmly to a vacant front row seat, holding my head up. If Sarah and Andrew believed, they had embarrassed me. They hadn't yet noticed anything. From the corner of my eye, I could see them sit down high, Sarah's confident posture weakened as expected, and I noticed her hesitating. I wanted to scream and run out of the church in a fury of wrath. But instead, in the midst of the havoc they had caused, I was an immovable force, a statue of calm. As the visitors kept pointing and whispering, they struggled to explain themselves to the priest. So I leaned back in my chair and folded my arms, thinking that this was not, in fact, the end. They were so successful that they took away my honor and left me triumphant, but I had something they weren't patient with and didn't realize. Looking back, I can't claim the betrayal happened suddenly, because they wouldn't have known what struck them when my next move arrived. Like cracks in a mirror, the clues were subtle yet sneaky, and only became apparent when the glass breaks. But when you're in love, you're too preoccupied to notice the little things. Sarah and I met through a common friend, so you have to convince yourself that everything is fine to see the cracks emerging. I fell in love with her the instant she entered the room because she had a way of making you feel like you were the only one there. Her smile is irresistible, her laugh contagious, and I fell deeply. My friends cautioned me that things were going too quickly for Sarah, but before long she was the center of my universe. It was too wonderful to be true, so I dismissed them as jealous or too cautious. I had entire faith in her, and she appeared to trust me for a while before my older brother Andrew, also known as Andrew the Golden Child, appeared. Andrew was brave and reckless, but he had this seductive quality that made him the man who could do no wrong, where I was cautious and analytical. His charm attracted others, but it also concealed his darker side as a child. I lived in his shadow, constantly trying to win, the acceptance that came so naturally to him. However, I believed that as we grew older, we had gone past the rivalry. Ultimately, brothers rather than rivals. Andrew was everywhere in the months before the wedding, constantly stopping by, making jokes, and giving uninvited suggestions over the location or the guest list. He would pat me on the back and talk about how he would help a better groom relax Mikey. Andrew was always making jokes, so I'm simply kidding and laughing. At least I believed he was, but occasionally, I caught him and Sarah interacting in ways that bothered me. I persuaded myself that any glances or laughter about anything I wasn't aware of were only fantasies. Sarah adored me, and Andrew was my brother. Why would they ever betray me? The truth began to slowly seep in like shadows stretching at sunset. Sarah started to act aloof, making up excuses to avoid me since she had a ton of work. I wanted to trust her when she said, "Or I just need some space to decompress." I believed that she was simply anxious about the wedding, but the way she looked at me changed. Her grin had vanished. Her touch felt more like a duty than a desire when it reached her eyes, and his behavior also shifted. He stopped with the jokes and began giving Sarah more attention during family meals than I felt comfortable with. Small gestures, like pulling out her chair or pouring her wine, shouldn't have mattered, but when I questioned him, they did. He smiled and laughed it off, saying, "You're being paranoid, little brother. Sarah is now like family, cocky and unconcerned. But the saddest part is that I wanted to assume that I was overanalyzing things and that the uneasy feeling in my stomach was just jitters before the wedding. After all, why would Sarah pick Andrew over me? We were arranging a life together. She claimed to love me. But then came Sarah spent her final night as a single woman with her bridesmaids the night before the wedding, while I stayed. Andrew unexpectedly stopped by my house to go over the vows I had prepared and to double-check the plans for the big day. "One last drink before you're a married man," he added, pouring us a bottle of whiskey while sporting a smug expression. We sat in silence for a long while, each with a glass, and I could feel the tension between us. I wanted to question him about Sarah and the odd things I had observed, but I refrained from doing so. Perhaps I was scared of what he might say, or perhaps I didn't want to express my doubts, so I lifted my glass. Andrew smirked and clinked his glass into mine as he murmured, "Here's to tomorrow." He spoke, looking ahead to tomorrow, but there was a tone that made me sick to my stomach. It wasn't a toast, but rather a pledge made that evening that I hardly understood. Every time I went to sleep, I saw that Sarah and Andrew's faces were too close together. My mind was racing with questions, concerns, and fears because their laughing was too personal. However, I reminded myself that I was being silly and that tomorrow would be ideal, with Sarah and I exchanging vows and all. Of this doubt would go away, but I knew in my heart that I didn't want to. I knew the flaws in the mirror were no longer undetectable, even to myself. They threatened to destroy all our dreams. And here we are, in this moment. And everything I believed to be true fell apart in seconds. So I realized it was time to do what I never thought I would: walk away.